You know, the story we all learn in school is pretty simple, right? The Roman Empire fell. Boom. End of story. But what if that's not really the whole picture? What if, instead of just collapsing, it transformed? Today, we're going to dive into one of the most incredible survival stories in all of history. So, yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? How does a superpower, I mean, we're talking about legions, laws, aqueducts, the whole shebang, just vanish? Well, the spoiler is, it didn't. The real story isn't this sudden dramatic collapse. Oh no, it's a much more fascinating tale of crisis, adaptation, and, in the end, a total transformation. Okay, so to really get how Rome managed to survive, we've got to start with how it almost completely broke apart. And look, this wasn't just one bad day. It was a literal perfect storm of crises, piling on from the inside and the outside, that brought this absolute superpower to its knees. And yeah, this wasn't like a building just getting knocked over in an instant. Think of it more like a slow, grinding crisis that went on for over 100 years. The empire was just stuck in this cycle of chaos, confusion, and constant civil war that basically wore it down to the bone. Now, what's crazy is that these problems weren't happening in a vacuum. They were all feeding each other, creating this vicious cycle. You've got constant civil wars, which means the borders are weak. Weak borders, that invites invasions. Invasions wreck your farms and trade routes, which tanks the economy. And with a bankrupt government, you can't pay your soldiers or fix anything, which, you guessed it, leads to even more instability. It was a total downward spiral. And right at the heart of this whole mess was a massive financial crisis, inflation. I mean, the government was flat broke and couldn't pay its army. So what was their brilliant, desperate solution? Basically, just print more money. They started mixing cheaper metals into their silver coins, but that just meant every coin was worth less. Prices went through the roof. They tried to put price controls in place, but it was way too little too late. So, with no money and not enough citizens willing to sign up and fight, Rome had to start hiring mercenaries. And here's the crazy irony. They often hired Germanic warriors. Yep, the very same groups who were often attacking their borders. These guys fought for a paycheck, not for the glory of the empire. And that just threw more fuel on the fire of instability. All right, so with the empire teetering right on the brink of total collapse, some leaders finally realized something radical had to be done. And their solution was, when you think about it, kind of brilliantly simple. If the empire is just too massive to govern, then, well, stop trying to govern it all at once. And this is where Emperor Diocletian steps onto the scene. He looked at all this chaos and he really got to the heart of the problem. His goal wasn't to conquer new lands. He was just trying to stop the bleeding. And his diagnosis was as simple as it was brilliant. The job of running the entire Roman Empire was just too darn big for one person. So his solution was something called the Tetrarchy, which literally means rule by four. He took this enormous empire and split it into four manageable chunks, each with its own leader. See, this wasn't about conquering foreign enemies. It was about conquering Rome's own administrative nightmare. The goal was to restore order and finally stabilize those chaotic frontiers. Then, right after Diocletian, Emperor Constantine comes along and basically doubles down on this whole idea. He decided the eastern part of the empire needed its own powerful center of gravity, a new Rome, if you will. So what did he do? He built a massive, heavily fortified, and super wealthy new capital city, Constantinople. And trust me, this one move would change the course of history forever. And just like that, this decision essentially created two completely different Roman destinies. You had the West, still centered on old Rome, which was really struggling and under constant attack. But then you had the East, based in the rich and very defensible city of Constantinople, which was set up for a totally different future. One half was heading for a massive transformation, while the other was built to last. Okay, so now we get to the part that everyone just calls the fall. But let's try to look at it a different way. Instead of a collapse, think of it more like a massive corporate takeover. The old management is out and new management is moving in to run the place. And this is a really, really important point. It wasn't like Roman people or Roman culture or all the Roman ideas just disappeared overnight. No, it was the central government in the West that fell apart. The bureaucracy, the tax collection system, the whole imperial command structure, that's what broke down. So as that central government just kind of faded away, it created this huge power vacuum. And all these different Germanic groups, many of whom had actually served in the Roman army, by the way, they moved in. But they weren't just invaders. In a way, they were inheritors. The old Roman provinces didn't get erased. They just got reformed into this patchwork of new kingdoms. The map of Europe was being completely redrawn.
So who was this new management? Well, you had the Franks, who moved into the province of Gaul and laid the groundwork for what would eventually become France. The Visigoths took over in Spain. The Ostrogoths right in Italy itself. And across the English Channel, the Angles and Saxons started to shape what we now call England. These were the new powers building the next chapter for Europe.
But here's the really crucial part. These new kings weren't trying to destroy Rome. In fact, they admired it. They often adopted Roman laws, they used Roman government structures, and they even married into the local Roman noble families. This wasn't a hostile takeover in that sense. It was more like a cultural merger. So if the actual government in the West was gone, you might be asking, what was left? Well, pretty much everything else. The ghost of Rome wasn't just haunting Europe, it was an active force, helping to build the next 1,000 years of history.
You can almost think of the new civilization that popped up, what we now call the Middle Ages, as a recipe with 3 main ingredients. First, you've got the energy and customs of the Germanic peoples. Then you mix in the powerful legacy of Roman law and organization. And finally, you add one more incredibly important institution that actually outlasted the empire itself, the Christian Church. So while the government of the Western Empire was literally crumbling to dust, the church was doing the exact opposite. It was getting more organized, more unified, and way more powerful. What started out as this persecuted little faith eventually became tolerated under Constantine, and then, boom, it becomes the official state religion. So when the emperors packed up and left, who was left to lead? Often it was the bishops and the pope who basically became the new leaders in their cities.
Okay, let's fast forward now about 300 years after the so-called fall of Rome. The Western Empire is just a distant memory. Europe is now this mosaic of rival Germanic kingdoms. And yet, the idea of Rome, this concept of a single, unified, grand empire, it's somehow more powerful than ever.
We're talking Christmas Day, the year 800, right there in the city of Rome itself. Something absolutely incredible is about to happen.
The most powerful king in Europe, the Frankish king Charlemagne, is kneeling before the Pope. And in this just stunning moment, the Pope crowns him Emperor of the Romans. I mean, this is it. This is the ultimate proof of survival. The idea of a unified Christian Roman Empire was so powerful, they literally brought it back from the dead and put the crown on the head of a Germanic king.
And that brings us right back to our big question from the beginning. You know, if so many of the languages we speak today come from Latin, if our legal systems are built on a foundation of Roman law, and if the whole idea of a unified West is basically the ghost of Rome, then did the empire ever really fall, or did it just become something else entirely? Now, that is something to think about.